Hi, Smarter News. It's the simple things. Have you heard that expression? It's the simple things that matter. And it's the simple things that are missing from some of our big news stories. And these things matter too. So as I was looking across the different headlines today, I thought, what is the theme that's coming out here? Some of these really basic parts of the story that sometimes we know or don't know or are confused over that are causing domino effects. And sometimes you just need to pause and say, hey, wait, it's the simple things. It's the simple things that are missing. It's the simple things like having coffee and friends and talking about the news that matter, right? Okay, let's go through these few different stories. I got 3 for you, bit by bit. We're going to start in Afghanistan, actually in the Middle East. As we talked about earlier this week, we had some high-profile cabinet members, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, traveling overseas to the Middle East to really have a presence there, reassure some of our allies that have helped us through this evacuation of Afghanistan. I want to show you what the Secretary of Defense said that's getting some attention. The Secretary of Defense said today, and this is on our website, the whole community, he's meaning the defense community, is kind of watching to see what happens and whether or not Al-Qaeda has the ability to regenerate in Afghanistan. Why is that quote important? It's important because it really resonates with some of the news that we've been reporting over the last week and highlights this question of the status of Al-Qaeda that we've talked so much about. So let's just go back to yesterday. We were talking about who's actually in the new Taliban government in Afghanistan. And I showed you this picture of an FBI most wanted poster for this alleged terrorist by the U.S. government, a designated terrorist by the U.S. government, I should say, who's the head of the Haqqani Network, one of the high-profile members of the Haqqani Network that we have designated as a foreign terrorist organization. There are those that consider the Haqqani Network to be an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, a branch of Al-Qaeda, or a completely separate entity of Al-Qaeda with friendly relations with Al-Qaeda. Or there are some, like Tom Jocelyn, who we just interviewed last week, who say, wait a minute, the Haqqani Network and Al-Qaeda, they're actually the same. In fact, there's a lot of intermarrying between the group. They're now considered family. So you see there's this debate about who Al-Qaeda is. And that is ongoing at the highest levels of government. And the reason why that matters is a few-fold. And just want to notice something on this. This is taking place at the highest level of government. It is not particular to Democrats or Republicans. There are Republicans that will give you a very academic debate about these different groups, some that are foreign terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and the Haqqani Network, and some that are not, like the Taliban. There are others that say, hey, they're all the same because they're all enemies of the United States. There are Democrats that will say these are divided. There are Democrats that will say these are all the same. And we're still at this place where these academic debates are happening about these different entities. And that matters because it's the simple things. Check this out. Have you noticed that Al-Qaeda is in fact spelled differently depending on who you're reading? We spell it with an E at Smarter News, but others like the Associated Press spell it with an I. That's because we're all phonetically trying to sound out or spell out an Arabic word. So even in the way that we're talking about Al-Qaeda in the United States, not just from government officials, but as journalists, we're inconsistent. We're inconsistent. It's the simple things, right? It's the simple things that matter. We can't even agree on the way that we're spelling the name of the terrorist group that 20 years ago inflicted such horror on the United States. And this is days away from 9/11. It's the simple things that matter. So pay attention to that as you see the different spelling. All right, let's talk about what's happening at the U.S. government today, something we haven't talked a lot about, which is what's happening with the government and how they're spending your money. It's easy to think about these headlines, by the way, like it's not your money, like it's the government's money, but it's our money. And they're trying to figure out how to spend it in a government funding bill. You've likely heard the headline number, which you see here, $3.5 trillion for a funding plan that's been put forward by the Democrats. Now, really, we're in where it matters, which is that they're marking up the bill. They're going to really put the bill together in great detail. And with a simple thing that matters here is the price tag, because there's still a lot of debate about the actual price tag. So we haven't dove really deep into this topic because we still have to see what the bill actually emerges to look like specifically. And there's a big question about whether or not it'll have the $3.5 trillion price tag. It could be lower. could potentially be higher, but right now it's really a question about whether or not some moderate Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin will hold out and not go along with Democrats that have the majority in the Senate to pass this because he wants a lower price tag. So despite all the specifics of the bill, it's a simple thing that really seems to be still a point of debate, the price tag. Why does this matter? Because we have to pass some sort of funding bill to keep the government open so we avoid a shutdown by the end of September. And then in October, what we're looking at is the debt ceiling. Simple way to think about this is we all have like a line of credit, right? And you don't want to go over the line of credit of what you're actually allowed to borrow. And a debt ceiling is very similar to that. And Congress has a way to expand our debt ceiling so that we don't default as a nation. And lawmakers have to figure that out too. So they have a lot of work to do in the next several weeks. That's important to know about. Okay, something that's happening today that's important is President Biden's going to be addressing the nation. He's going to be talking about COVID and a new plan that he has for the pandemic and as a way to curb what we're seeing, which is a rise in infections or have seen over the last several weeks. Let's just do something real basic. And let's look at what we're seeing from the CDC. And these are some of the graphs. I just want to add some context to this conversation because you see these headlines about ICUs, hospitalizations, deaths. Here's what the data is actually showing us. And this is why the president is speaking today. This is a look at cases overall in America, COVID-19 cases. You can see this is this year where we are, September 2021. And just to the left, well, my left, is where we were last year. So the cases are dramatically higher than last year at the same time. That's really important to know. Let's take a look at hospitalizations as well. There's been a lot of talk about that. This is August of last year to August of this year. You can see on the far side of the graph, last August is much lower than where we are at this August. That's important to know as well. Let's see children hospitalizations. You can see last year, much lower than where we were at this point in the pandemic. Important to note here that we're still looking at less than 2 children per 100,000 that are hospitalized. That's what this graph is looking at. But statistically, it's a big leap, and it certainly matters. So this is something that the president is looking at as well as he's trying to figure out how does he lead on this issue. But here's 2 other graphs that I think are important. This is what deaths look like last year compared to this year. Now remember, deaths lag hospitalizations and infections. So we may not see the peak of where we are in this latest surge yet reflected in this graph. But you can see that it's not right now, deaths in America from COVID-19 are not dramatically higher than last year at the same time. In fact, they look sort of the same. I mean, we're looking at it far away, but it's not dramatically higher. I want to be sensitive about this. We're talking about deaths, but I really want you to see this compared to what you see with infections and hospitalizations. We haven't seen that huge jump in deaths. And here's a final graph I want to show you. This is the way the United States looks like when you're looking at the 7-day moving average for positivity rates. So these are tests where people are testing positive for COVID-19. The one important thing to note here is we're not seeing a lot of the dark blue, which is important. We're still seeing high positivity rates in some states, but we're not seeing what we saw a couple weeks ago. And so I think that's important to know. So the president's going to be talking today about a plan. And there's a very simple question when it comes to this particular news story, which is this. It might be a question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. What more can the federal government do at this point in the pandemic to change behavior or affect infections? What more can the federal government do? We've seen 2 different presidents with very different presidential leadership styles and very different policies. And we've been able to experience that through the pandemic. So what more can the federal government do? That is the simple question that the president is going to answer today. Whether or not his answer matches the answer of the citizens is another broader question. So something to watch for. That's going to be an announcement later this afternoon, early evening, and we'll have a couple bullet points from that. So once we hear exactly how he's going to be phrasing in his tone. Final quick fun story for you when it comes back to the simple things. Today in history, the United States was officially made the United States. And you're saying, well, wait, I always thought it was the United States. Well, not necessarily. This is the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, you can see the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, but United isn't capitalized. It's actually not part of the title. States of America is capitalized, but United is not. And in fact, it was the United Colonies that was capitalized as the title. But on September 9th, many, many years ago, the decision was made that United States should be capitalized. And that's how we got our name. So this is a great lesson for all of us that capitalization matters. And you never know when the simple things become the bigger things. And that's why these news stories matter. I always love hearing from you. I love hearing your questions and comments on what stories you'd like to hear more about. So please keep those coming. You can put them on our social media. You can also email me at hello@smarternews.com. And we have all of these stories and more up on our website. So it's the simple things. That's what I'm going to be thinking about today. Simple things. Gratitude for all of you and your support of Smarter News. Have a great day.